Chapter 16. The next 3 weeks were no fun for Sarah. In fact, they were an ordeal. Both sides having presented evidence and arguments, the jury ruled in favor of Sarah. She celebrated by throwing a party at Terry's home. But then the senator's attorneys filed an appeal the next day. The headline in the bulletin said, "Senator Sharon vows she will never get a dime." Sarah's mood plummeted. Terry told her they would have to start all over again. She went to see Mary Ellen. "Do you wish me to read the cards once more?" Sarah gave a shrug. "If you wish, but that's not why I came. I just wanted to talk. What do you think of my chances?" Mary Ellen looked long into her eyes. "You are a strong woman, but the senator is a powerful man. I don't know who is the strongest, but I know something you perhaps have not thought of. That is, that the lawyers are stronger than both of you. The senator exists only at the sufferance of his attorneys. The same is true of yourself. It is the law that rules both your lives." Sarah chewed at her lip. It was a nervous habit that she had lately developed. "I'm not sure what you mean. I'll have to think it over. What most upset me in court today was that they are still claiming the senator and I were not married, that my contract is not legal. They even go so far as to say it's a complete forgery, which in fact it is." Sarah started. "Whoever told you that? It's not true. The senator told me what to write, and we both signed it, so it's a legal contract." She broke off at Mary Ellen's continued stare. "At least, that's what I remember." She passed a hand across her eyes. "Sometimes I have trouble remembering things." Mary Ellen arose. "Let me fetch some fresh tea." Then, 2 weeks after that conversation, Heather came home in the afternoon with some shocking news. "The senator died," she announced. Marina was in a rocker where she'd been reading a romance novel. She put the book down slowly. "You mean Senator Sharon? What on earth do you mean? He died?" Heather fell onto the sofa. She spread her hands as if helpless. "Dead. I just came from court. They announced it today. Heart failure, I guess." Then his lawyers went on with the trial as if nothing had happened. "How horrible. And Sarah was in court? How did she take it?" "I can't say. Had no chance to speak to her. She never said a word or changed expression, just stared at the lawyers. At the end of the day, they rushed her out through the mob. She must be in shock." Marina stood and paced the floor. "I shall send her a note of commiseration. No, that might not be appropriate. Perhaps I should go and see her. The trial goes on as usual, you say?" "Well, of course. There's the senator's estate to be settled. He had millions, you know. This might make it even harder for Sarah." "Yeah, I can well imagine. It's all quite confusing, isn't it? I believe I really ought to visit her. I know. I'll bring the emperor. Perhaps he can find a way to cheer her up." Sarah felt cheerful. At first, she thought she ought to feel sad about the senator's death, but then she discovered she didn't. Today, she was cheerful about the fact that she was not sad. It was Sunday and court in recess. Mr. Terry's butler admitted her visitors. "I'm so happy to see you both." She beamed at them when they were seated in the parlor. While Mr. Terry's house was not quite wealthy, the room was well furnished with overstuffed, dusty furniture and lots of knickknacks. "You're looking well," Marina said. "I had thought you might be in seclusion." Sarah had been trying on one of her best ball gowns. She did a little pirouette in the middle of the room. As to that, wearing black would not become me, I think. I suppose I should mourn, but I don't feel like a widow. In fact, I won't be one for long. How does the world find you today, your majesty? Turning toward Joshua. Joshua stroked his beard and thought. It finds me well. I was sorry to hear of your loss, but perhaps it was not so much a loss as we presumed. Sarah gave a short giggle. I hope I don't sound calloused, but the fact is, the senator and I had not been close for some time, and then he chose to abuse me so. So hard for a lady to manage on her own, especially after being rejected by her own husband. Please do not judge me harshly. I must be honest in saying I feel mainly a sense of relief. And I may have some wonderful news in the near future, but I'm not to speak of that just yet. Well, Marina got to her feet, and Joshua followed. I must say, I'm happy to hear you're well, Sarah, although these must be trying times for you. Joshua and I could only stop by for a moment, so we'll be on our way. You won't be staying for tea? Ah, well, if you must. I do hope you will both come to the soiree we are planning. A soiree? May I ask, what is the occasion? Oh, I spoke too soon, didn't I? I promised Mr. Terry I wouldn't breathe a word about it just yet. But then, since you are both such intimate friends, if you swear to say nothing, she paused, looking from Joshua to Marina and back. If you wish, I can see you're terribly excited about something. Mum's the word, Sarah. Sarah glanced around as if searching for eavesdroppers. She took a step closer and spoke in a voice above a whisper. Mr. Terry has proposed marriage, and I have accepted. 3 weeks later, the soiree took place as promised. Since Mr. Terry's home was too small for all the invited guests, he rented the dining room at the Lick House. The cream of San Francisco society showed up. Sarah had sufficient notoriety, if not respectability, to attract the best the city had to offer. A liveried butler thumped his cane and introduced each guest as they entered. Miss Marina came early, accompanied by her daughter. Later on, Joshua made his entrance in his best uniform, duly presented as Joshua Norton, First de Gratia Emperor of the United States. Mary Ellen as well appeared. Her ball gown outshone even Sarah's. Sarah was well aware that Mr. Terry did not approve of this person, but she had insisted on the invitation. Some of the city's nouveau riche also disapproved of a woman of color in society, but most of the older residents took the matter in stride. Sarah hardly left her side for most of the evening. I see, Mary Ellen said, that Mr. Terry combines business with pleasure. She nodded in his direction across the room, where he was engrossed in conversation with two of his attorneys. Yes, he's terribly serious about this legal case of mine. He's highly optimistic. Did you hear Judge Field has been elevated to the state Supreme Court? He's the one who ruled in our favor, you know, or at least the jury did, and he accepted their decision. So he'll be sitting on my case a second time. I hope you won't be disappointed, dear. Judges have been known to change their minds. He wouldn't dare, Sarah said. She stared across the room at Terry. Not if he knows what's good for him. About midnight, Terry mounted the stage to announce the betrothal of himself and Mrs. Sarah Sharon. By that time, Marina had gone home with her daughter. Marina next day read the bulletin with a glum expression. She found a review of Sarah's party on the second page, together with another update on her legal problems. But that was not what made Marina glum. It was the financial reports. Another bank failure, she read aloud. I don't like the news of late. Heather had been busy writing something at her desk. Aren't we making a profit still? I mean, at the theater? Marina smiled. You're still a child, Heather. You don't understand high finance. We can make a profit and still go broke. I've been able to hold off the bank, but the mortgage is about to fall due. They won't be put off any longer. Heather stared into space. Could we be put out of house and home? Marina took a moment to answer. I shall not lie to you. Yeah, it's quite possible. Perhaps Emperor Norton could issue a proclamation. A lot of good his proclamations have done himself. Then again, perhaps he has the right idea. He owns nothing and has nothing to lose. If he needs money, he just prints it. Who's to say he's wrong? Most folks say he's mad. After reading the news, I wonder who is maddest, Marina said. Heather came across the room to look at the newspaper. Do you think Sarah will be happy in her marriage? Dear, I hope so. The Journal of Sarah Althea Hill. My goodness, Mr. Terry does have energy. He has been busy in court all week. There was hardly time for the wedding, but I have never felt happier. He is a good husband and has more than enough energy left for the bedroom. We're quite optimistic about my claim for back alimony and a share of the senator's estate. Next week, Mr. Terry will go to Sacramento to present my case before the Supreme Court. That should settle the matter once and for all. Sarah did not go to Sacramento, since there was no need for her to give testimony. The arguments were all about legal precedents and discovery of evidence and such, which Sarah barely understood. Mr. Terry was gone 3 days. In the meantime, she spent some hours at Mary Ellen's home. When did you first discover you could hear the spirits? Mary Ellen asked. Sarah pulled at the corners of a purple silk kerchief, twisting and turning it. I'm not sure just when, but it has been quite recent. They tell me all sorts of interesting things, though I'm not sure they hear me when I speak to them. What sort of things do they tell you? Sarah smiled and held her kerchief to her ear. She shut her eyes a moment, listening. They tell me what other folks are doing. They inform me that at this moment, Mr. Terry is preparing a brief in an anteroom. A secretary is helping him. Mary Ellen sipped at her tea. My dear, I must tell you, listening to spirits is not always safe or wise. Perhaps you might do better to put up the kerchief and not listen for a time. Listen instead to those around you. Sarah chuckled. Oh, but I can do both, can't I? And it's not as if these are evil spirits. In fact, they're quite friendly and nice. And do they speak to you of other people besides Mr. Terry? Sarah shut her eyes again. Sometimes. Oh, yes, I see. It appears the Emperor has just arrived at Miss Marina's home. They're having quite a serious discussion, it seems, but I can't hear what it's about. Chapter 17. A sad day, Joshua said. So you say the theater will close at the end of the month? Truly a sad day. Yeah. Marina's eyes were red from weeping. I suppose I shall lose the house as well. They're saying it's all because of the greed of the railroad. I wouldn't know about that. It's just hard times is all. Boom and bust, Joshua said. I came here to California during the rush, when it was all boom. Then I myself went bust. But that was before I became emperor. I must confess I am, for once, at a loss what to do. Ye have helped us all with your gentleness. Ye need do no more. Joshua studied the grain of his walking stick, or scepter. He said, There is perhaps one thing. You know my attorney friend, Mr. Buxby. He may have some advice. I doubt it. But if you think I should speak to him. No, there's no need. I will see him myself. However, have you told your daughter the unhappy news? Yeah, I can hardly deceive her. She knows all about it. She thinks we should go off in a world tour. Perhaps so. Well then, please ask Heather to meet me at Mr. Buxby's office tomorrow afternoon, say 1 p.m. He always sees me without an appointment. I'm sure there will be no problem. But why Heather? Joshua shrugged. She can bear a message if there is one. There's no need for you to make the trip downtown. Marina gave him a puzzled look. I suppose she can do no harm. I'll tell her directly. Judge Terry arrived on the boat from Sacramento the next afternoon. At about the same time, Joshua and Heather went to Mr. Buxby's office. He and Sarah had a long, heated discussion. Later, Sarah wrote in her journal, Dear Diary, Mr. Terry is furious. It seems his trip to court was a fiasco. Judge Field reserved his own previous decision and declared my marriage to Senator Sharon was not legal. I don't understand the twisting of his legal reasoning. And now he declares the document a forgery, and even if it wasn't, it's still not legal because of not being registered. What a farce. Mr. Terry lost his temper and berated the judge. Now Mr. Terry is cited for contempt and must appear in court next week to answer the charge. He is beside himself. He says he will personally horsewhip Judge Field. Unfortunately, he did make the error of saying this in the courtroom. I believe I shall go to the garden and hear what the spirits have to say. Buxby was occupied with a client when Joshua arrived, but his secretary asked him to wait. Joshua busied himself with the front page of the bulletin until Heather came in about 10 minutes later. It is so unlike you to be tardy, Joshua said, rising. The streetcar broke down. I had to walk. I'm sorry, but don't concern yourself, Mr. Buxby. But don't concern yourself. Mr. Buxby is engaged at the moment. What's this all about, Joshua? Joshua combed his beard with his fingers. You sound suspicious, my lady. You're up to something. I can tell. What have you got up your sleeve, Mr. Emperor? Nothing at all. He pulled back his cuffs to demonstrate. Merely this tin box, which is in plain sight, not up my sleeve. You're not fooling me, Joshua. You can pull the wool over mother's eyes, but she broke off as Buxby's office door opened, and a man with a bowler hat in one hand and a briefcase in the other charged out. Buxby put his face out a moment later. Yet another satisfied customer. He grinned. Then his face turned somber, and he said in a lower tone, Railroad attorney, but I won't burden you with the details. Come in, both of you. To what do I owe this auspicious visit? Joshua waited until he and Heather were seated across from Buxby at his desk. He glanced around at the shut door and lowered his voice. A small bit of legal business, sir, if you won't mind. Not at all. Tell me, please. Buxby folded his hands before him. Heather was staring at Joshua. Joshua cleared his throat. I felt it best, under the circumstances, to have a lawful witness present during a minor transaction, in case there should be questions in the future. Buxby glanced at each of them, wearing his professional, serious face. And what sort of transaction might this be? Some sort of contract? No, sir. More in the nature of transfer of property. Joshua turned to face Heather. As you are aware, dear Heather, your mother is in some financial difficulty. She told me. Ah, yes. Well, I have given the problem some thought. You see, I have grown lately to feel some disappointment in my own position. I thought the nation would welcome and honor me as their rightful emperor. To some extent they have, at least in this city. I am grateful for the privilege of serving as beneficent dictator. However, I have lately grown to accept the knowledge that my dreams of dwelling in a palace on a golden throne are not to be. Here he glanced at Buxby, whose expression had not changed. Likewise, I had hoped to have a golden crown one day, studded with jewels, but this item also is withheld. Perhaps it's just as well. I think the beaver hat suits me better. He smiled. Buxby and Heather said nothing, waiting for him to continue. Therefore, I have come to the conclusion there is no use in my holding on to the crown jewels any longer. I therefore present them to you. He held out the tin box for Heather to take. After a moment, she reached for it and gingerly opened the lid. She looked up at him again. Are they real? Oh, yes, quite. From South Africa, you see. Perhaps Mr. Buxby would care to examine them. Heather passed the box to Buxby, who withdrew a lens from his desk drawer. He picked up several diamonds, one after another, peering closely. Heather and Joshua could see his greatly enlarged eye blinking rapidly. Yes, they are genuine. I can tell by their cut and refraction. He took out one gem and turned to the window. With great care, he scratched a letter N on the glass. Then he returned the gems to Heather. You are presenting her with the entire box, sir? Yes. Any one gem sold at auction should bring enough to pay off the theater mortgage. As to the others, Miss Heather, you are free to do with them as you wish. Keep them for dowry, or travel around the earth and never marry. As you will, do what you must. Heather screwed up her face. Why not give him to my mother? Joshua glanced at Buxby. Because she has no need of more than one. She has made her own way, and will continue. You have the future before you, and no one may tell you what portends. You will live to see this new century coming, with unknown miracles and dangers. Wealth will help you through. I don't know what you may choose, Miss Heather, but a few riches may make your choices easier. Mr. Buxby, would you be so good as to make out a receipt? What will you do? Heather asked. Joshua grinned and gave his stick a thump on the floor. Enjoy life. This evening I shall attend a lecture at the Academy of Sciences. It will be about the theories of Mr. Darwin. It should be great fun. The sky came down as mist, changing to soft rain. Joshua did not mind the rain. He had his umbrella, but made no move to open it. California Street grew quiet this time of evening. Most of the businesses closed, and the shopkeepers had gone home to dinner. It came to him that he had no more need of Dr. Luck. His sadness had gone. He sensed a warm uprising in his breast that must be happiness. Although he had not thought about his crown jewels often, he realized they must have been worrying at some part of his soul all this time. It was a relief to be rid of them. Now he was entirely free. At last he was really like those two mangy curs, Lazarus and Bummer, owning nothing, but free to dine where they pleased. Perhaps, he thought, after the lecture I shall eat in Chinatown again. Restaurants stay open late there. He was looking forward to the lecture. The Academy of Sciences attracted thoughtful folks. He might find someone to enter into discussion afterwards, or perhaps a small group. With luck, he might be invited to dinner. He felt delight in the world, despite the evening drizzle. Colors appeared brighter, the air electric. Approaching the corner of California and DuPont, he glanced up at St. Mary's Cathedral. He had never before paid much attention to the building. Constructed entirely of red brick, he had always thought it rather ugly. Tonight it seemed to glow with an inner light, and he found a strange beauty in it. He read the peculiar motto inscribed in large letters on its steeple. Son, observe the time and fly from evil. Yes, he decided. The time grows late. That is what I shall do. I shall fly from evil. He felt that he was flying as his body sank slowly to the pavement. A young policeman was nearby. He rushed to the Emperor's side to cradle his head, while blowing his whistle at a passing carriage. He bawled orders at the driver to get the Emperor to the hospital, but by that time Joshua Norton had already found his golden crown. Chapter 18. The Journal of Sarah Althea Hill. Dear me, these are difficult times. Mr. Terry and I, David, I mean, have been spending 3 days at his country house. It has been quiet here, but so hot. David said he wanted to cool off before his next appearance in court, but it hasn't quite worked out that way. He is still furious with Judge Field. He vows revenge if ever he catches him outside the courtroom. A copy of the San Francisco Call was delivered this morning. I was shocked to discover that Emperor Norton has passed away. It seems he was walking in North Beach on his way to a lecture when he fell in the street. How sad. I'm afraid the poor man was quite mad after all. How could I ever have suspected he was hoarding a secret treasure? They say his room was searched, but nothing of value was found. The funeral was yesterday. The paper says there were 10,000 people attending. The procession was 2 miles long. I'm sorry I missed it. It must have been a spectacle. On Monday, David and I must travel back to Sacramento to face his charge of contempt. We shall be taking the afternoon train. David doesn't know yet about my ability to hear the spirits. I will explain when the time is ripe. For now, I shall wait till he's not around, while I consult them about our best course of action. I remain hopeful regarding my appeal. From the San Francisco Evening Bulletin. Judge Field hires bodyguard. Exclusive to the bulletin, more developments in sensational divorce trial. The bulletin has learned through confidential sources that Judge Field, who last week cited Sarah Hill's attorney for contempt, has appointed a personal bodyguard. It is said he fears for his life due to recent death threats against him on the part of her attorney. Said attorney is Mr. David Terry. Astute readers may recall that Mr. Terry was once notorious for having slain our beloved Senator Broderick in a duel. Judge Field's bodyguard is said to have been appointed from the ranks of United States Marshals. The railroad engine is black, smooth, and shiny as jet. Black smoke billows from its funnel, and the sound of its pistons as it approaches the station are like black boots stamping on the ground. Sarah writes for the last time in her journal. I sense that something, I know not what, is about to happen, that it will be something unpleasant, I am certain. We have been all night on this train. I slept most comfortably in dear David's arms, but the spirits have been trying to warn me. I hear their voices as shrieks without words. Early this morning, we learned from another passenger that, by coincidence, Judge Field is aboard. At this discovery, David's rage only seemed to increase. We're approaching the station, where passengers may alight and break fast in the railroad restaurant. I pleaded with David not to go, but he insists he has nothing to fear from the judge or his bodyguard. He hopes he may encounter the man, so the judge may be humiliated in public. I have misgivings. I shall remain with David, come what may. I offered to bring my pistol, but he ordered me to leave it on the train. The engine slows, screeches, Hisses, squeals, comes at last to a stop. The conductor emerges, placing a step stool before each of the car doors. There are 3 passenger cars, as well as the baggage car and diner. One by one, passengers climb down, stretch themselves, look around with bleary eyes, head for the restaurant door. One of the passengers is Judge Field of the State Supreme Court. He marches straight ahead, looking neither to right nor left. By his side is a short fellow wearing a cheap gray suit. Unlike the judge, he scans his path at every moment, eyes never at rest. He himself is nondescript, unnoticed, yet he misses nothing. The judge and the man with him enter the restaurant, where a dozen or so other passengers are already seated at long tables. Judge Field takes his place with the rest, expecting no special treatment. The restaurant is known for fast service, vital for a railroad establishment. The 2 men give their orders and are served almost at once. The judge begins to eat, so does his companion, but his eyes are always busy. A few minutes later, David Terry and Sarah enter arm in arm. They appear to be a loving couple. Few give them a second glance, but Terry's head jerks as he spots the judge. He releases Sarah's arm and strides forward. What happens then takes but a few seconds. Terry crosses the room. The judge has not looked up and does not see him. His companion, a United States Marshal, puts down his fork and starts to rise. Before he can get on his feet, Terry reaches the judge. The judge looks up at him, startled. David Terry raises his right hand and slaps the judge hard across the cheek, once, twice. Some food particles spurt from the judge's mouth onto his beard. By this time, only a few seconds have passed. The marshal has regained his feet. He reaches inside his coat, withdraws a pistol, and fires directly into Terry's chest. Some time later, Marina announced a memorial concert in memory of Emperor Norton. Proceeds would go toward construction of a new hospital. Before the concert, Mary Ellen came backstage to pay her respects. Marina, in her dressing room, gave her a warm embrace. "I'm so happy you could come. I know how much Joshua admired you." "And I him. There are so many familiar faces here, enemies and friends alike. The Emperor is here in spirit." "Indeed. I'm sorry Sarah couldn't be here. I heard what you did for her. I imagine it was the only right thing." Mary Ellen sighed. "I fear it was. She never got over Mr. Terry's death, and she could find no other attorneys to help her with her lawsuit, you know. She could have remained in the country, but she would come back to San Francisco. She took to wandering the streets. She was quite sad at the end. Hotels all refused her. I thought of giving her shelter myself, but to tell the truth, I feared she might burn the house down. She was quite unhappy." "So you had her committed to the asylum. Do you suppose she will ever leave that place?" "Who can say? Not even I can predict the future." The concert that night became the talk of the town. There was a string quartet playing Mozart, as well as singers from the opera. In recent years, Marina had rarely performed herself, but tonight she chose to close out the show. She sang her old songs and played her old fiddle and did 4 encores. Heather, in the front row, took notes for the bulletin. A month later, Marina and Heather took the boat to Stockton to visit Sarah at the State Insane Asylum. "Such a delightful young lady," Sarah beamed when she caught sight of Heather. "I'll wager you have dozens of suitors for your hand." Heather gave her a serious look. "I intend to be a journalist. I doubt I'll have time to marry, though I may take a lover. Soon I shall travel around the world." Marina laughed nervously. "Heather is precocious and creative, much like her father. She does as she will." I myself have been married twice, Sarah said. Perhaps she has the right idea. Marina wanted to change the subject. You're wearing a lovely dress, Sarah. Thank you. I always felt green best becomes me. Have you walked about the grounds yet? The garden is lovely this time of year. They began to stroll. A few other inmates wandered about, a few of them carrying on conversations with themselves. I have quite forgiven Mary Ellen for having me sent here. Please tell her so. It's quite pleasant. We have no end of amusements, and people are so generous. Of course, everyone has read about me in the papers. She trailed off. I understand there will be a celebration at Christmas. Oh, yes, there are frequent shows and parties, all in my honor, of course. And if I can find no one else to converse with, I always have my spirits. She pulled a silk handkerchief from her sleeve. Well, then, I'm so glad you're well, but I see it's nearly time for my performance. Marina had volunteered to perform for the inmates and staff. She had brought no other performers with her, but she had her fiddle. Everyone assembled in the common room, and she mounted the little stage. One of the inmates, as introduction, played Beautiful Dreamer on an upright piano. Then Marina stepped forward and began to sing. Her listeners leaned forward in their seats with rapt attention. Marina felt she was back in the old Missouri music hall. She sang with all her heart, for Sarah, for Joshua Norton, and for Randall most of all. She sang and played her fiddle for an hour and a half, until all but exhausted. At last, as a final song, she sang her old favorite. Some of the audience joined in. Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all sup sorrow with the poor. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times come again no more. They were the finest audience she had ever known. The end.